A poor woman, desperate to save her child, offers her wedding ring to pay for medicine, but when a stranger sees it, he buys it for $1 million and simply says, "Come with me." But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The coughing from the back bedroom had grown worse over the past few days. Sarah Miller pressed a damp cloth to her son's forehead, her heart breaking at how small and fragile Ethan looked in the twin bed that once seemed too big for him. At 7 years old, he should have been outside playing with friends, chasing fireflies as summer gave way to autumn. Instead, he was fighting for every breath, his little chest rising and falling in an uneven rhythm that terrified her. "Mom?" Ethan's voice was barely a whisper, his eyes fluttering open. "Can I have some water?" "Of course, sweetheart." Sarah reached for the glass on the nightstand, gently lifting his head to help him drink. Even that small movement seemed to exhaust him. When he finished, he sank back against the pillow, his face flushed with fever despite the cool cloth. Sarah forced a smile. "Try to rest, okay? Dr. Bennett will be here soon." She smoothed his damp hair away from his forehead and quietly left the room, leaving the door ajar so she could hear him if he called. In the small kitchen of their apartment, Sarah gripped the edge of the sink, her knuckles turning white as she fought back tears. The stack of unpaid bills on the counter seemed to mock her. Rent, electricity, and now mounting medical expenses she couldn't possibly afford on her meager salary from the diner. 3 months ago, when her ex-husband Daniel had announced he was moving across the country with his new girlfriend, he'd promised to keep sending child support. But the payments had stopped coming 6 weeks ago and her calls and messages went unanswered. Now Ethan was sicker than he'd ever been, and she was completely alone. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. She quickly wiped her eyes and went to answer it, relief washing over her when she saw Dr. Bennett, who had been their family doctor since Ethan was born. "Thanks for coming," Sarah said, stepping aside to let him in. "His fever's gotten worse, and the cough medicine isn't helping anymore." Dr. Bennett nodded, setting his worn leather bag on the coffee table. "Let's have a look at him." Sarah led him to Ethan's room, hovering anxiously in the doorway as the doctor examined her son. The examination seemed to take forever, each crease in the doctor's forehead deepening Sarah's worry. Finally, he packed up his stethoscope and thermometer, gesturing for Sarah to follow him out of the room. "It's pneumonia," he said quietly once they were in the living room, "and it's progressing quickly. The antibiotics I prescribed last week aren't working. He needs a different medication, something stronger, and possibly hospitalization if he doesn't improve in the next 24 hours. Sarah's stomach dropped. "But I don't have health insurance," she whispered. "Not since I had to cut my hours at the diner. I can barely afford to keep the lights on." Dr. Bennett's expression softened with sympathy. He'd known Sarah since she was pregnant with Ethan, had watched her struggle to make ends meet after the divorce. "The new medication is expensive," he admitted, "but it's what he needs. Without it—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. "How much?" Sarah asked, her voice hollow. "About $800 for the full course." Sarah felt the room spin. $800 might as well have been $8 million. She had exactly $127 in her checking account and nothing in savings. The rent was already 2 weeks late. "I'll write the prescription," Dr. Bennett said, pulling out his pad. "You can try applying for emergency assistance at the hospital. Sometimes they have programs for cases like this." Sarah nodded numbly, taking the prescription slip from his outstretched hand. But she knew those programs took time that Ethan didn't have. After Dr. Bennett left, promising to check back the next day, Sarah sat on the couch, the prescription clutched in her trembling hand. She had pawned almost everything of value months ago to keep up with the bills. Her laptop, her grandmother's silver, even her favorite books, all gone. The only thing of worth she had left was her wedding ring. She looked down at the simple gold band with its small diamond. Daniel had given it to her 8 years ago, full of promises about their future together. For years after he left, she'd kept wearing it, partly to ward off unwanted attention at the diner, and partly because she couldn't bear to part with the symbol of what their family should have been. But now, what choice did she have? "Mom?" Ethan's weak voice called from the bedroom. "Are you okay?" Sarah quickly wiped her tears and went to him, sitting on the edge of his bed. "I'm fine, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" "My chest hurts," he admitted, his blue eyes, so like his father's, clouded with pain. "Did Dr. Bennett say I'll get better soon?" "Yes," Sarah lied, smoothing his blanket. "He gave me a prescription for some medicine that will make you feel much better. I'm going to get it right now, okay? Mrs. Wilkins from next door will come stay with you while I'm gone." 20 minutes later, with her elderly neighbor settled in to watch over Ethan, Sarah walked the 12 blocks to Carlson's pawn shop in the fading autumn light. The familiar neon sign flickered in the window, casting an eerie glow across the sidewalk. She'd been here before, during the darkest days after Daniel left, when the child support checks were late and Ethan needed new shoes for school. The bell above the door jangled as she entered. Mr. Carlson, a gruff man in his 60s with a permanent scowl, barely glanced up from his newspaper. "We're closing in 10 minutes, he grumbled. Sarah approached the counter, her heart pounding. Slowly, she twisted the gold band off her finger and placed it on the glass surface between them. "How much can I get for this?" Mr. Carlson picked up the ring, examining it under the harsh fluorescent lights. He turned it over, checking for hallmarks, then reached for his jeweler's loupe to inspect the small diamond. "200, he said finally, setting it back on the counter. Sarah's heart sank. 200? But it's worth at least 1,000. The diamond is a 1/4 carat and the band is 14-carat gold. Mr. Carlson shrugged, unmoved. 250 then. That's the best I can do. Market's down. Tears pricked Sarah's eyes. Even at $250, she was still far short of what she needed for Ethan's medicine. She was about to plead with him when the bell above the door jangled again, and a tall figure entered the shop. "Sorry, we're closing," Mr. Carlson called out, not bothering to look up. "Just give me a minute," a deep voice responded. "I'm looking for a watch. Won't take long." Sarah glanced over her shoulder. A man in his early 40s stood just inside the door, dressed in an expensive-looking charcoal suit that seemed out of place in this run-down neighborhood. His dark hair was sprinkled with gray at the temples, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to being in charge. She turned back to Mr. Carlson, lowering her voice. "Please, I need at least 500. My son is sick, and I have to pay for his medication." "Not my problem, lady," Mr. Carlson replied, sliding the ring back toward her. 250 or nothing." A tear slipped down Sarah's cheek as she stared at the ring. $250 plus the $127 in her account still left her more than $400 short. What was she going to do? "Excuse me." The deep voice came from directly behind her now. "I couldn't help overhearing. May I see the ring?" Sarah turned, startled to find the well-dressed stranger standing so close. His eyes were an intense shade of gray, studying her with unexpected kindness. For some reason she couldn't explain, she picked up the ring and handed it to him. He examined it carefully, turning it in the light. But Sarah had the strange feeling he was less interested in the ring than in her reaction to selling it. After a moment, he looked up, his expression unreadable. "I'll give you $1 million for this ring." The words hung in the air, so outlandish that Sarah was certain she'd misheard him. Mr. Carlson's jaw dropped. "What?" Sarah managed to choke out. The stranger reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook and pen. With a steady hand, he wrote out a check, tore it from the book, and placed it on the counter beside the ring. Sarah stared at the check, unable to process what she was seeing. $1 million, made out to cash, signed with a flourish, Alexander Donovan. "This is a joke," she whispered, looking up at him. "Who are you?" "Alexander Donovan," he replied simply, as if that explained everything. "And I assure you, the check is real. You can call my bank to verify if you'd like." He slid a business card across the counter next to the check. Sarah picked up the card with trembling fingers. Donovan Enterprises was embossed in silver on heavy cream cardstock, along with a phone number and address in the city's most exclusive business district. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Why would you pay $1 million for this ring?" Alexander Donovan's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Let's just say I have my reasons." He picked up the ring and slipped it into his pocket. Then he gestured toward the door. "Come with me." "Come with you? Where?" Sarah's mind was reeling, suspicion battling with desperate hope. "To get your son's medication," he replied, "and then we can discuss an opportunity that might solve your financial problems more permanently." Sarah hesitated, every warning bell ringing in her head. She didn't know this man. Getting into a car with a stranger, even one who'd just given her $1 million check, went against everything she'd ever taught Ethan about personal safety. And yet, what choice did she have? If the check was real, it meant Ethan could get the medicine he needed. It meant they wouldn't lose their apartment. It meant she could finally stop living on the edge of disaster. Mr. Carlson, who had been watching this exchange with increasingly stunned disbelief, finally found his voice. "Lady, you'd be crazy not to go with him. That's Alexander Donovan, the Alexander Donovan, real estate tycoon, worth billions." Sarah looked back at the stranger, at Alexander Donovan, trying to reconcile this information with the man standing before her. Why would a billionaire be in a rundown pawn shop in her neighborhood? And why would he pay a fortune for her modest wedding ring? "My driver is outside," Alexander said quietly, seeming to understand her hesitation. "We'll go to the pharmacy first, get your son's medication. You can call your neighbor on the way to let her know you'll be a bit longer than expected. I promise you'll be home within 2 hours." Sarah took a deep breath, clutching the check and business card like lifelines. "Okay," she said finally, "but I need to get the medicine to my son first. That's all that matters right now." Alexander nodded, holding the door open for her. "Of course." As they stepped out into the evening air, Sarah saw a black luxury sedan idling at the curb, a uniformed driver standing beside it. This was really happening. "After you," Alexander said, opening the car door. Sarah slid into the plush leather interior, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and wild hope as Alexander settled in beside her. As the car pulled away from the curb, she couldn't help wondering if she'd just made the best decision of her life, or the worst. The interior of Alexander Donovan's car was like nothing Sarah had ever experienced. Soft leather seats cradled her exhausted body while subtle lighting illuminated the spacious cabin. The privacy partition between them and the driver was raised, creating an intimate cocoon that made her acutely aware of the powerful stranger sitting beside her. "The nearest 24-hour pharmacy?" Alexander asked, his voice breaking the silence. "Central Pharmacy on Oakwood Avenue," Sarah replied, still clutching the prescription in her hand. She hesitated, then added, "I need to call my neighbor. Let her know I'll be a little longer." Alexander nodded, gesturing to a phone mounted in the car's console. "Please, go ahead." As Sarah dialed Mrs. Wilkins' number and briefly explained that she'd be delayed, she was conscious of Alexander watching her, his gray eyes attentive but unreadable. When she hung up, he pressed an intercom button and gave the driver directions to the pharmacy. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly, as the car pulled smoothly away from the curb. "For taking me to get Ethan's medicine, but I still don't understand. Why would you give me so much money for my ring? It can't possibly be worth anything close to $1 million. Alexander leaned back in his seat, his expression contemplative. For a moment, Sarah thought he might not answer at all. "The ring itself isn't what interests me," he finally said. "It's what it represents, the sacrifice you were willing to make for your son." Sarah frowned, confusion and wariness battling within her. "I don't understand." "Let me ask you something, Mrs. Miller. Sarah Miller. Mrs. Miller. That wedding ring, I'm assuming it's the last valuable thing you own, correct?" Sarah nodded slowly. "And yet you didn't hesitate to sell it for a fraction of its worth to help your son." It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. "Of course," Sarah replied, her voice stronger now. "I'd sell everything I own if it would make Ethan well again. He's all that matters." A faint smile touched Alexander's lips. "Exactly. That kind of devotion is rare." Before Sarah could respond, the car slowed to a stop outside Central Pharmacy, its fluorescent lights harsh against the darkening sky. The driver appeared at Sarah's door, opening it with a formal nod. "I'll wait here," Alexander said. "Take your time." Inside the pharmacy, Sarah handed the prescription to the pharmacist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a perpetually worried expression. As the woman began processing the order, Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out the check, staring at it once more. $1 million. It was such an impossible sum that she half expected it to disappear if she looked away. Could she even cash it? Would a bank actually give her money for this slip of paper? And what would Alexander Donovan expect in return? "That'll be $789.43, the pharmacist announced, interrupting Sarah's thoughts. Sarah hesitated, then pulled out her debit card with its meager $127 balance. "I'm sorry, I don't think I can—" "Is there a problem?" Alexander's voice came from behind her. She hadn't heard him enter the pharmacy. "The medicine costs almost $800, Sarah explained, embarrassed. "I can't access the check you gave me until tomorrow at the earliest." Without a word, Alexander pulled out a platinum credit card and handed it to the pharmacist. The transaction was completed in seconds, and moments later, Sarah was clutching a white paper bag containing the medication that might save her son's life. "Thank you," she whispered, tears threatening to spill over. "I'll pay you back as soon as I can cash the check." Alexander waved away her words as they walked back to the waiting car. "Consider it a small advance. Now, I believe I mentioned an opportunity that might help with your financial situation more permanently." Once they were settled back in the car, Alexander pressed a button that darkened the windows, giving them complete privacy. "I've been searching for someone with your particular qualities for a long time, Mrs. Miller." Sarah tensed, suddenly very aware of how little she knew about this man. Noting her reaction, Alexander continued, "This is strictly a business proposition. I should have been clearer. I'm looking for someone to fill a role in my organization, one that requires absolute dedication and integrity." "What kind of role?" Sarah asked cautiously. "My nephew James is 13 years old. His parents, my brother and sister-in-law, died in a boating accident 2 years ago. I became his legal guardian, but my work takes me around the world for weeks at a time. James needs stability, structure, and most importantly, someone who will put his needs first." "You're offering me a job as, what, a nanny?" Alexander shook his head. "Much more than that. I'm looking for someone to manage my household and, more importantly, to provide James with the parental guidance he desperately needs. The position includes a generous salary, full benefits, and accommodations for you and your son at my estate outside the city." Sarah stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "And you're offering this to me, a complete stranger, based on the fact that I was selling my wedding ring to buy medicine for my child?" "I've spent the past 6 months interviewing candidates, professional nannies, household managers, even a few former teachers, all with impressive resumes and excellent references." Alexander's expression hardened slightly. "Yet when I tested them, offered them twice their asking salary to take on additional responsibilities that would take time away from James, they didn't hesitate to accept." "You were testing their priorities," Sarah realized. Alexander nodded. James has everything money can buy, but what he needs is someone who will put him first. Always. Someone like you." The car slowed as they approached Sarah's apartment building, the contrast between the luxury vehicle and the rundown neighborhood striking. Sarah's mind raced with questions, doubts, and a tiny, dangerous sliver of hope. "I need to think about this," she said finally. "It's a lot to take in." "Of course." Alexander reached into his jacket and pulled out another business card, this one with a handwritten number on the back. "This is my private line. Call me when you're ready to discuss the details. The check is yours regardless of your decision." Sarah took the card, still feeling as though she'd stepped into someone else's life. "I should go. My son needs his medicine." As she reached for the door handle, Alexander spoke again, his voice softer than before. "Mrs. Miller, may I ask one more question? What happened to your husband?" The question caught her off guard. "He left," she said simply. 3 years ago. He has a new life now, on the other side of the country." "And he doesn't help support your son?" Sarah's throat tightened. "The child support stopped coming a while ago. I haven't been able to reach him." Something flickered in Alexander's eyes, anger, perhaps, or disgust, but his voice remained calm. "I see. Thank you for your honesty." He extended his hand. "I hope to hear from you soon." Sarah shook his hand briefly, then hurried up the cracked concrete path to her building, the precious medicine clutched tightly to her chest. As she reached the door, she glanced back to see the black car still waiting, Alexander Donovan watching her from the shadowed interior. Inside her apartment, Mrs. Wilkins rose from the sofa, her aged face creased with concern. "Ethan's been asking for you, dear. His fever seems worse." "I've got his medicine," Sarah said, already moving toward Ethan's bedroom. "Thank you so much for staying with him." "Mrs. Wilkins patted her arm. "Anytime, dear. He's such a good boy. I left some soup on the stove, thought you both might need something warm." After seeing her neighbor to the door, Sarah hurried to Ethan's room. Her son lay still in the dim light, his breathing labored and his cheeks flushed with fever. His eyes fluttered open as she sat on the edge of his bed. "Mom," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You were gone so long." "I know, sweetheart. I'm sorry." Sarah measured out the medicine according to the pharmacist's instructions and helped Ethan sit up to take it. "This is going to make you feel much better." Ethan grimaced at the taste but swallowed obediently. "Did you have to sell something again?" Sarah hesitated, surprised by his perception. Even at 7, he noticed so much. "I was going to," she admitted. "But then something unexpected happened. I met someone who might be able to help us." "Like a fairy godmother?" Ethan asked, a ghost of his usual smile appearing. Sarah laughed softly, brushing his damp hair back from his forehead. "Not exactly. More like a businessman with an interesting offer." She tucked the blankets around him. "But we don't need to talk about that now. You need to rest and let the medicine do its work." She stayed with him until he drifted off to sleep, one small hand clutching hers even in slumber. The apartment was quiet except for the occasional car passing on the street below and the soft ticking of the clock on Ethan's nightstand. For the first time in hours, Sarah had a moment to process everything that had happened. The $1 million check was still in her purse, along with Alexander Donovan's business card. The offer he'd made seemed too good to be true. A well-paying job, a secure place to live, health benefits that would cover Ethan's medical needs. It would solve every problem that had been keeping her awake at night. But she'd be working for a man she'd just met, living in his home, becoming responsible for his orphaned nephew. And why her? The story about testing candidates made sense on one level, but there was something Alexander wasn't telling her. She could feel it. Sarah gently extracted her hand from Ethan's and went to the kitchen. She needed to eat something, to clear her head and think rationally. Mrs. Wilkins' soup was still warm on the stove, and the comforting aroma of chicken and vegetables filled the small kitchen as she ladled some into a bowl. As she ate, Sarah's gaze kept returning to her bare left hand, the pale indentation where her wedding ring had been for the past 8 years, a visible reminder of the choice she'd made tonight. She hadn't regretted taking off the ring, not when it meant getting medicine for Ethan. But now, with the ring gone and $1 million check in its place, she felt as though she'd closed one chapter of her life and opened another. The question was, what would this new chapter bring? And could she trust the mysterious man who had just rewritten her future with the stroke of a pen? Morning light filtered through the thin curtains of Sarah's apartment as she sat at the kitchen table, staring at the check that had turned her world upside down. She'd barely slept, checking on Ethan every hour, relieved to find his fever slowly dropping as the medicine took effect. Now, with her son still sleeping peacefully, she had time to think. The check looked legitimate. The watermark, the signature, the quality of the paper, everything suggested it was real. But $1 million? For a wedding ring worth perhaps 1,000? Nothing about it made sense. Sarah pulled out her phone and typed Alexander Donovan into the search bar. Immediately, dozens of articles appeared. Alexander Donovan, CEO of Donovan Enterprises. Real estate magnate, philanthropist. His net worth was estimated at over $4 billion. There were photos of him at charity galas, cutting ribbons at new developments, shaking hands with politicians, the same intense gray eyes, the same confident bearing she'd observed in person. One article, dated about 2 years ago, confirmed what he'd told her about his brother's death. "Donovan mourns brother in tragic accident," the headline read. The piece mentioned that Alexander had become guardian to his teenage nephew but offered few details, respecting the family's privacy during their time of grief. So that part of his story checked out, but the job offer still seemed suspicious. Why her? Why not hire a professional with experience caring for traumatized children? And the $1 million check? Was it just an elaborate test of her character? Would the bank laugh in her face if she tried to deposit it? A soft cough from Ethan's room pulled her from her thoughts. She hurried to check on him, finding him awake and looking markedly better than he had the night before. "Mom?" he asked, his voice stronger than it had been in days. "Can I have some juice?" Relief washed over her. "Of course, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" "My chest doesn't hurt as bad," he said, sitting up a little. "And I'm hungry." Sarah smiled, touching his forehead, still warm but not burning hot as it had been. "That's great news. I'll get you some juice and toast. Dr. Bennett will be happy to hear you're feeling better." In the kitchen, as she prepared Ethan's breakfast, Sarah made up her mind. She would go to the bank and try to deposit the check. If it cleared, she would use a small portion to pay their overdue rent and bills, and put the rest in a separate account until she decided what to do about Alexander's job offer. If the check was rejected, she'd be no worse off than she had been before. After making sure Ethan was comfortable with his breakfast and favorite cartoon, Sarah called Mrs. Wilkins to ask if she could watch him for a couple of hours. "Of course, dear," the elderly woman said. "He's looking better today?" "Much better," Sarah confirmed. "The medicine is working. I just need to run to the bank and take care of a few things." An hour later, Sarah sat across from a bank manager in a small private office, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as he examined the check. "This is unusual," Mr. Peterson said, adjusting his glasses as he studied the signature. "A check of this size would typically be handled through a wire transfer. May I ask what it's for?" Sarah had anticipated this question and prepared an answer that was technically true without revealing the strange circumstances. Mr. Donovan purchased an item of significant sentimental value to him. This was the agreed-upon price. Mr. Peterson raised his eyebrows but nodded. "I'll need to verify the funds with Mr. Donovan's bank. It might take a few hours, possibly until tomorrow. Will that be acceptable?" "Of course," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. This was really happening. And how would you like to handle the funds, assuming everything checks out? I'd like to open a separate savings account for most of it, Sarah said. But I need about $3,000 in my checking account as soon as possible. Mr. Peterson nodded, his expression softening slightly. For immediate expenses? Yes. Medical bills, rent, things like that. I understand. Why don't I see if we can advance you that amount today, against the check? If Mr. Donovan's bank confirms the funds, we'll deposit the remainder as you've requested. Sarah could have hugged him. That would be incredibly helpful. Thank you. By the time she left the bank, Sarah had $3,000 in her checking account, more money than she'd had at one time in years. She paid the overdue rent at the management office, settled the electric bill that had been threatening disconnection, and stopped by the pharmacy to pay back the cost of Ethan's medicine. The pharmacist looked at her strangely when she handed over 8 crisp $100 bills, but Sarah simply smiled and left before any questions could be asked. Her last stop was the grocery store, where she filled a cart with fresh fruits and vegetables, quality proteins, and a few treats she knew would tempt Ethan's still-recovering appetite. As she waited in the checkout line, her phone rang. An unknown number. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Mrs. Miller, this is Alexander Donovan." His deep voice was unmistakable. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Sarah stepped out of line, leaving her cart to the side. "No, not at all. I was just at the grocery store." "Good. I wanted to check on your son. Is he responding well to the medication?" The genuine concern in his voice surprised her. "Yes, he's much better today. The fever's down and he's eating again. Thank you for asking." "I'm glad to hear it." There was a brief pause. "Have you had a chance to think about my offer?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I have, but I still have questions. Many questions." "I'd expect nothing less. Would you be willing to visit my home tomorrow? You can bring your son, of course, see the estate, meet James, and we can discuss the details of the position in person." Sarah hesitated. Part of her still couldn't believe this was happening. But another part, the part that had been struggling to keep Ethan fed and housed for the past 3 years, saw an opportunity that couldn't be ignored. "Yes," she said finally. "We can come tomorrow. Ethan should be well enough for a short trip by then." "Excellent. I'll send a car for you at 10 if that suits." "That's fine. Thank you." After hanging up, Sarah returned to her cart, her mind racing. Tomorrow, she would see Alexander Donovan's world up close. She would meet the nephew he wanted her to care for, and she would decide whether to accept an offer that could change her and Ethan's lives forever. When she returned to the apartment, laden with groceries, she found Ethan sitting up in bed, coloring in one of his well-worn activity books, while Mrs. Wilkins knitted in the chair beside him. "Mom, I ate all my lunch and my fever's almost gone," Ethan announced proudly. Mrs. Wilkins nodded in confirmation. "He's been a perfect patient. Even took a little nap after lunch." "That's wonderful," Sarah said, bending to kiss Ethan's forehead, which was indeed much cooler than before. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilkins. Let me get these groceries put away and then I'll fix you a nice cup of tea before you go." Once Mrs. Wilkins had departed with a loaf of fresh bread as a thank you gift, Sarah sat on the edge of Ethan's bed. "I have something exciting to tell you," she began. "We've been invited to visit a very grand house tomorrow. There's a boy named James who lives there and he might like to meet you." Ethan's eyes widened. "A grand house? Like a castle?" Sarah laughed. "Not quite a castle, but very nice, I think. The man who owns it is named Mr. Donovan. He's the one who helped us get your medicine last night." "The businessman? Not a fairy godmother?" Ethan asked, remembering their conversation from the night before. "That's right. Mr. Donovan has offered me a job working at his house, taking care of things there and helping to look after James, who's his nephew. If I take the job, we would live there too." Ethan's expression grew serious, his young brow furrowing in thought. "Would I still go to my school? Would I still see Tommy and Lucas?" Sarah's heart tightened. Tommy and Lucas were Ethan's best friends, the sons of another single mother in their building. No, sweetheart. Mr. Donovan's house is in a different area. You'd go to a new school and make new friends? Oh. Ethan looked down at his coloring book, absently tracing a red crayon over the lines he'd already filled. Would I have my own room? Yes, I'm sure you would. Would you be happier there, Mom? You wouldn't have to work so many jobs? The question caught Sarah off guard. She hadn't realized Ethan had noticed how tired she was, how stretched thin by working the diner job during the day and taking online data entry work at night after he was asleep. I would only have one job, she said carefully. And yes, I think I might be less tired. But what matters most is what's best for you. That's why we're going to visit tomorrow to see if it feels right for both of us. Ethan nodded solemnly. Okay. I'll try to like it. Sarah hugged him, her throat tight with emotion. You're the best son in the whole world, do you know that? Ethan hugged her back. And you're the best mom. After a moment, he pulled away, his expression brightening. Can we have spaghetti for dinner? With garlic bread? Absolutely, Sarah laughed, grateful for his resilience. Spaghetti and garlic bread it is. That night, after Ethan was asleep, Sarah sat at her small kitchen table with a notepad, making a list of questions for Alexander Donovan. What exactly would her duties be? What were the terms of employment? What was James like? She needed to know everything before she could make such a life-altering decision. As she wrote, her gaze drifted to the window. Outside, the city hummed with its usual nighttime energy, traffic sounds blending with distant sirens and the bass from a party somewhere down the block. This had been her world for so long, the struggle, the constant worry, the making do with too little. The thought of leaving it behind was both exhilarating and terrifying. Whatever happened tomorrow, Sarah knew one thing for certain. She would do whatever was best for Ethan, even if it meant stepping into the unknown world of Alexander Donovan. Precisely at 10 o'clock the next morning, a sleek black car pulled up in front of Sarah's apartment building. But it wasn't the same sedan from the night before. This was a full-sized limousine, complete with a uniformed driver who introduced himself as Thomas. Mr. Donovan sends his apologies for not coming personally, Thomas explained as he held the door open for Sarah and Ethan. He had an unexpected business matter to attend to this morning, but he'll meet you at the estate. Ethan's eyes were as wide as saucers as he climbed into the limousine, taking in the plush leather seats, the small television mounted on the partition, and the miniature refrigerator stocked with juice boxes and snacks. "Mom, look," he whispered excitedly. "It's like a house inside a car." Sarah smiled, relieved to see him so energetic after days of illness. The medicine had worked wonders. His fever was gone, and while he still had a slight cough, he was nearly back to his usual self. "This is very nice," she agreed, settling beside him. "But remember what we talked about. We're just visiting today to see if this might be a good place for us. We haven't decided anything yet." Ethan nodded, but his attention was already captured by the control panel that operated the sunroof. Thomas caught Sarah's eye in the rearview mirror and smiled kindly. "Please feel free to use any of the amenities, Mrs. Miller. The drive will take about 45 minutes." As the limousine pulled away from the curb, Sarah watched her neighborhood recede through the tinted windows. The cramped apartment buildings, the corner bodega where she bought groceries on sale, the bus stop where she'd waited countless mornings in all kinds of weather. All the familiar landmarks of her hardscrabble life seemed to shrink in significance as they drove toward the unknown. The city gradually gave way to suburbs, and then to rolling countryside dotted with large estates set back from the road behind imposing gates and mature trees. The houses grew bigger, the properties more expansive, until Thomas turned onto a private drive marked only by a discreet brass plaque that read Donovan Estate. A wrought iron gate swung open silently as they approached, and the limousine proceeded down a winding driveway lined with ancient oak trees. Around a final bend, the house came into view, and Sarah couldn't suppress a small gasp. It wasn't a house so much as a mansion, a sprawling stone structure with multiple wings, tall windows, and a grand entrance flanked by classical columns. Impeccably maintained gardens surrounded the residence, featuring sculpted hedges, vibrant flower beds, and a large fountain in the center of the circular driveway. "Wow," Ethan breathed. "It really is like a castle." Thomas brought the limousine to a smooth stop at the front entrance, where wide stone steps led up to massive double doors. Before he could open the car door, the front doors of the mansion swung open and Alexander Donovan stepped out. He looked even more imposing in daylight, dressed in a casual but clearly expensive sweater and slacks. His expression warmed as he approached the car. "Mrs. Miller, Ethan," he greeted them as Thomas opened the door. "Welcome to my home. I trust the drive was comfortable?" "Very," Sarah replied, helping Ethan out of the car. She'd dressed them both in the nicest clothes they owned, her in a simple blue dress she usually reserved for job interviews, Ethan in khaki pants and a button-down shirt he normally wore only for school pictures. Yet standing before Alexander's casual elegance, she felt conspicuously underdressed. "You must be Ethan," Alexander said, crouching down to the boy's level. "I'm Alexander Donovan. Your mother tells me you've been quite ill, but you're looking much better now." Ethan nodded solemnly. "The medicine helped a lot. Mom says you helped us get it. Thank you." Something in Alexander's expression softened. "You're very welcome. I'm glad you're feeling better." He straightened up and gestured toward the house. "Shall we go inside? Mrs. Reynolds, my housekeeper, has prepared lunch, and my nephew, James, is looking forward to meeting you both." The interior of the mansion was even more impressive than the exterior. The entrance hall featured a soaring ceiling, marble floors, and a grand staircase that curved elegantly up to the second floor. Artwork that Sarah suspected was both original and priceless adorned the walls, and fresh flowers filled large vases on antique tables. Alexander led them through several richly appointed rooms, giving a brief tour that included a formal dining room that could seat 20, a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a conservatory filled with exotic plants. Finally, they reached a more casual space, a sunny sitting room that opened onto a terrace overlooking the grounds. A teenage boy was seated on one of the sofas, his attention focused on a handheld video game. He looked up as they entered, his expression guarded. "James," Alexander said, "this is Mrs. Miller and her son, Ethan." James stood reluctantly, shoving the game into his pocket. He was tall for 13, with the same dark hair and gray eyes as his uncle, though his were partially hidden behind the fringe that fell across his forehead. "Hi," he said flatly. "It's nice to meet you, James," Sarah responded warmly, nudging Ethan slightly. "Hi," Ethan echoed, looking up at the older boy with undisguised curiosity. An awkward silence fell, broken by the arrival of an older woman in a practical dress and apron, whom Alexander introduced as Mrs. Reynolds, the housekeeper. She announced that lunch was ready to be served on the terrace if they wished. "Perfect," Alexander said. "We can enjoy the pleasant weather while we talk." The terrace was set with a table that, while smaller than the formal dining room, was still elegant with crisp linens and fine china. The view overlooked perfectly manicured gardens that stretched to a shimmering lake in the distance. Sarah had never seen anything like it outside of movies. As they were seated, Mrs. Reynolds brought out a selection of sandwiches, fresh fruit, and homemade lemonade. Ethan's eyes widened at the spread, but he remembered his manners, placing his napkin in his lap as Sarah had taught him. "So, Ethan," Alexander began as they started to eat, "your mother tells me you're 7. What grade are you in at school?" "Second grade," Ethan replied. "I like it. I'm good at math and reading." "Excellent subjects to excel in," Alexander nodded. "James here is quite the mathematician himself. Perhaps he could show you his telescope later. He's quite interested in astronomy." James looked up from his plate, where he'd been pushing a grape around aimlessly. "If you want," he muttered. not making eye contact with anyone. I've never looked through a real telescope before, Ethan said eagerly. Can you see the moon craters? A flicker of genuine interest crossed James's face. Yeah, and the rings of Saturn when it's visible. I have a star chart in my room that shows when you can see different planets. Cool! Ethan's enthusiasm seemed to break through some of James's reserve. While the boys tentatively began to converse, Alexander turned his attention to Sarah. I thought perhaps after lunch James could show Ethan around the grounds, under Mrs. Reynolds's supervision, of course, while you and I discuss the details of the position. That sounds reasonable, Sarah agreed. Before we go too far, though, I need to be clear about something. I appreciate your generosity with the check, but I haven't made any decisions yet about accepting the job. Alexander's expression remained impassive. Of course. The check was for the ring, not a down payment on your services. Whether you accept the position or not, it's yours to keep. He took a sip of his lemonade. Though I hope you'll consider the offer seriously. As you can see, James needs someone like you in his life. Sarah glanced at the teenager who was now showing Ethan something on his phone, his earlier reticence somewhat diminished by Ethan's unguarded interest. He seems like a normal 13-year-old to me. Appearances can be deceiving, Alexander said quietly. James has struggled since losing his parents. He's withdrawn at school, has frequent nightmares, and has had difficulty connecting with the tutors and counselors I've arranged for him. What he needs is not more professional help, but genuine care, a family environment. Sarah considered this. And you think I can provide that? I know you can. You've devoted yourself entirely to your son's well-being, often at great personal sacrifice. That's exactly the kind of commitment James needs. Alexander's intense gaze held hers. The position would include managing the household staff, overseeing James's schedule, and most importantly, being present for him, helping with homework, attending school functions, ensuring he doesn't retreat into isolation. And my son? What role would he play in all this? Ethan would be a part of the household with all the same privileges as James: private schooling, extracurricular activities of his choosing, the best medical care. He and James would be raised as, well, not as brothers exactly, but as family. After lunch, Mrs. Reynolds appeared to take the boys on a tour of the grounds, promising to show Ethan the koi pond and James's favorite climbing tree. Once they were alone, Alexander led Sarah to his study, a handsome room lined with dark wood paneling and leather-bound books. I believe in being transparent, he said, handing her a folder. This contains the formal offer of employment. The salary is $150,000 annually, with comprehensive benefits for both you and Ethan. You would have your own suite of rooms in the East Wing, while Ethan would have a bedroom near James in the main family quarters. Sarah flipped through the papers, her heart racing at the figures she saw. The salary was more than 5 times what she currently earned. There was a health insurance plan, a retirement package, even a college fund for Ethan. This is extremely generous, she said carefully. It reflects the importance of the role. Alexander moved to stand by the window, looking out over the estate. I travel frequently for business, sometimes for weeks at a time. When I'm gone, you would be responsible for everything here, including making decisions for James's welfare. That's a lot of responsibility to entrust to someone you've just met. Alexander turned back to her, his expression serious. I'm an excellent judge of character, Mrs. Miller. It's a necessary skill in my line of work. From the moment I saw you in that pawn shop, willing to sell your wedding ring for your child's medicine, I knew you had the qualities I've been searching for. There was something in his tone, something underneath the confidence, that made Sarah pause. Why is this so important to you, Mr. Donovan? Surely there are professional agencies that could provide qualified care for James? Alexander was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than before. My brother and I were raised by a succession of nannies and boarding schools. Our parents were distant, career-focused. When Peter had James, he promised things would be different for his son, and they were, until the accident. He met Sarah's gaze directly. I promised my brother I would give James the family life that we never had. I'm trying to keep that promise. The vulnerability in his admission caught Sarah off guard. This powerful, wealthy man was revealing a very personal motivation, one she hadn't expected. I understand wanting to give a child what you didn't have, she said quietly, but this is still a big decision. For both me and Ethan. Take all the time you need to think about it, Alexander replied. The offer stands regardless of when you decide. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of grandeur and unexpected moments of connection. Mrs. Reynolds returned with the boys, Ethan chattering excitedly about the koi pond and the greenhouse filled with exotic plants. Even James seemed more animated, a hint of color in his previously pale cheeks. James showed me his treehouse, Ethan announced. It has real windows and solar lights and everything. It's not really a treehouse, James corrected, though without the sullenness from earlier. It's a tree observatory. Uncle Alex had it built so I could use my telescope without light pollution from the house. Alexander smiled at his nephew's enthusiasm. Perhaps you could show Mrs. Miller later? I'm sure she'd be interested in seeing your setup. James shrugged, but not dismissively. Sure, if she wants to. Sarah caught Alexander's eye, recognizing the subtle communication. See how he's opening up already? She had to admit the change in James since lunch was remarkable. The guarded, monosyllabic boy had given way to someone more engaged, more willing to connect, at least with Ethan. I'd love to see it, Sarah said warmly. I don't know much about astronomy, but I've always thought the stars were beautiful. They're more than just beautiful, James replied, a flash of passion in his gray eyes. They're like history you can see. The light from some stars takes millions of years to reach us. When you look at them, you're literally looking into the past. I never thought of it that way, Sarah admitted. That's fascinating. Mrs. Reynolds cleared her throat gently. If you'll excuse me, I should check on dinner preparations. James, perhaps you could show Ethan the game room while your uncle and Mrs. Miller finish their discussion? James hesitated, then nodded. Come on, he said to Ethan. We have a pinball machine and everything. As the boys left, Alexander gestured for Sarah to join him on a stone bench overlooking a rose garden. James seems quite taken with your son, he observed. Ethan has always been good at making friends, Sarah replied. He's naturally curious and open. She hesitated, then added, James seems like a good kid underneath his reserve. He's been through a lot. Yes, he has. And he's handled it as well as can be expected. Alexander's expression softened as he watched a pair of butterflies dance over the roses. My brother and his wife were wonderful parents. Warm, engaged, the kind Peter and I never had. Their loss left a hole in James's life that I can't fill on my own. Sarah studied Alexander's profile, noting the subtle lines of strain around his eyes. You've done your best, I'm sure. My best isn't enough. I'm away too often, and when I am here... He trailed off, then shook his head. Business comes naturally to me. Personal connections are more challenging. Because of how you were raised? Alexander nodded. Our parents viewed children as investments, not individuals with emotional needs. They provided every material advantage but little affection. I learned to navigate that world effectively, but James needs more. He needs what you give Ethan, unconditional love and steady presence. Sarah was silent for a moment, absorbing his words. There was a vulnerability in his admission that seemed at odds with his powerful persona. Can I ask you something, Mr. Donovan? Of course. Why the ring? Why pay so much for something so ordinary? A faint smile touched his lips. Is that what's been bothering you? The explanation is simple enough. I needed a way to help you that you would accept. You strike me as someone with too much pride to take charity, but you would accept a transaction, even an absurdly lopsided one. if it meant helping your son. Sarah felt a flush of embarrassment at how accurately he'd read her. So it was all just a pretext to offer me this job? Not entirely. The moment I saw you in that pawn shop, ready to sell something precious for your child's medicine, it reminded me of my brother. He would have done anything for James. Alexander met her gaze directly. The million was a gesture of respect for that kind of devotion. The job offer is something separate, though born from the same recognition of your character. Sarah wasn't entirely convinced. But before she could press further, the sound of children's laughter drifted from an open window above them. Ethan's high, clear giggle mingled with a deeper chuckle that she realized must be James's, perhaps his first genuine laugh in a long time. "They seem to be getting along well," she observed. "Yes, they do." Alexander stood, offering her his hand. "Would you like to see the rest of the house? The areas that would be your domain if you accept the position?" The eastern wing contained a suite that would be Sarah and Ethan's living quarters. A spacious sitting room, 2 bedrooms, and a private bathroom that was larger than her entire current apartment. The furnishings were elegant but comfortable, with warm colors and soft fabrics that created an inviting atmosphere. "Mrs. Reynolds thought you might prefer to add your own personal touches," Alexander explained as Sarah ran her hand over the smooth surface of an antique writing desk. "The rooms can be redecorated to your taste." "They're beautiful as they are," Sarah replied honestly. "More beautiful than anywhere I've ever lived." Next, Alexander showed her the family quarters, including James's bedroom, a large space filled with books, astronomical charts, and models of the solar system, and the room that would be Ethan's, directly across the hall. "This used to be the nursery when James was smaller," Alexander explained. "It's been updated, but if Ethan would prefer different decor..." Sarah looked around the cheerful room with its built-in bookshelves, window seat overlooking the gardens, and adjoining bathroom. It was a child's dream bedroom, thoughtfully designed and perfectly maintained. "I think he'd love it just as it is," she said softly. The tour continued through the kitchen, a chef's paradise where Mrs. Reynolds ruled with gentle authority, the indoor pool, the home theater, and finally Alexander's study once again, where he offered her tea. "I know it's a lot to take in," he said as he poured from a silver teapot, "but I hope you're beginning to see how you and Ethan might fit here." Sarah accepted the delicate china cup, gathering her thoughts. "It's an incredible opportunity," she admitted, "but I still have concerns. I'd be worried if you didn't. Please, tell me what's on your mind." "For one thing, I don't have experience managing a household like this. I've never supervised staff or coordinated the kind of lifestyle you maintain." Alexander waved this away. "Mrs. Reynolds has been with the family for 30 years. She can guide you through those aspects of the role. Your primary focus would be James, and maintaining your relationship with Ethan, of course." "And what about James's education? You mentioned he's withdrawn at school." "He attends Westfield Academy, about 20 minutes from here. It's an excellent school, but yes, his teachers have expressed concern about his social isolation and declining academic performance. They've been accommodating given the circumstances, but..." Alexander sighed. "He needs someone to check his homework, attend parent-teacher conferences, keep him accountable. I do what I can, but my schedule is unpredictable." Sarah nodded, considering. "And what would your expectations be for Ethan?" "He would attend Westfield as well. The school has an outstanding elementary program. Beyond that, he would simply be a child in a home where his needs are met and his interests encouraged." Alexander set down his cup. "Mrs. Miller, Sarah, I want to be clear. I'm not asking you to pretend this is a conventional family arrangement. I'm offering you a professional position with clear boundaries and expectations. But within those parameters, I hope both James and Ethan would benefit from a stable, nurturing environment." It was the first time he'd used her first name, and something about the way he said it made Sarah look up sharply. There was an intensity in his gaze that she couldn't quite interpret. Not romantic exactly, but personal, in a way that transcended employer and potential employee. "I need to discuss this with Ethan," she said finally. "He seemed to enjoy today, but moving here would mean big changes for him. New school, new friends, new routines." "Of course. Family decisions should be made as a family." Alexander stood, moving to a cabinet in the corner of the study. "While you're considering, there's something else I'd like to show you." He returned with a small velvet box which he placed on the table between them. "Your wedding ring." Sarah stared at the box in surprise. "You still have it? I assumed you'd gotten rid of it." "Why would I do that? It was important to you." He opened the box, revealing the simple gold band with its small diamond. "It represents something valuable. Your commitment to your son, your willingness to sacrifice for him. I never intended to keep it." Sarah reached out hesitantly and touched the ring, memories flooding back, not of Daniel, but of Ethan. His birth, his first steps, his first day of school, all the moments when this ring had been a part of her identity as his mother. "Thank you," she said quietly, closing the box without taking the ring. "But I sold it. It's yours now." Alexander studied her for a moment, then nodded, respecting her decision. "It will be here if you ever want it back." Before Sarah could respond, the door to the study opened, and James appeared, Ethan at his side. "Uncle Alex? Mrs. Reynolds says dinner will be ready in 30 minutes. Is it okay if I show Ethan the tree observatory before then?" Alexander glanced at Sarah, deferring to her judgment. "That's fine," she replied with a smile. "Just be careful, Ethan. Listen to James and do as he says, okay?" "I will," Ethan promised, already bouncing with excitement. As the boys left, Sarah caught a glimpse of James placing a protective hand on Ethan's shoulder, guiding him down the hallway. It was a small gesture but revealing. The teenager taking responsibility for the younger child, finding purpose in being a mentor. "James hasn't shown anyone his observatory in months," Alexander said quietly. "Not even me." Sarah nodded, understanding the significance. Whatever she decided about the job offer, something important had already happened today. A lonely boy had found a connection, a reason to emerge from his shell. Dinner was served in a smaller, more intimate dining room than the formal one Sarah had seen earlier. Mrs. Reynolds had prepared a meal that somehow managed to appeal to everyone at the table, sophisticated enough for Alexander, but with options that tempted both Ethan and James. The conversation flowed more easily than Sarah would have expected, with James animatedly describing the constellations he'd shown Ethan, and Ethan asking dozens of questions about the estate and its history. As Sarah watched her son interact with James and Alexander, she tried to imagine this becoming their daily reality. Meals in this beautiful room, conversations about stars and history, the security of knowing Ethan's future was provided for. It was a world away from their tiny apartment and constant financial stress. But was it the right choice? Could she adapt to this life of privilege without losing herself in the process? And what about Alexander himself, this complex man who was offering them so much while keeping parts of himself carefully guarded? As the evening wound down, Sarah noticed Ethan trying to stifle a yawn. Despite his improved condition, he was still recovering from his illness, and the excitement of the day had clearly worn him out. "I think it might be time for us to head home," she said gently, placing her napkin beside her empty dessert plate. "It's been a wonderful day, but Ethan needs his rest." Alexander nodded in understanding. "Of course. Thomas will bring the car around." He turned to Ethan with a warm smile. "It was a pleasure meeting you, young man. I hope you enjoyed your visit." "It was awesome," Ethan replied with unrestrained enthusiasm. "Especially the tree observatory and the koi pond. The fish came right up when James fed them." James, who had been quiet during dessert, looked up from his half-eaten chocolate mousse. "You could come back and see them again, if you want to." His voice was hesitant, as if he feared rejection. "Really?" Ethan's face lit up. "Could we, Mom?" Sarah felt Alexander's gaze on her as she answered. "We'll see, sweetheart. We have some decisions to make first." She turned to James, not wanting to disappoint him. "But I know Ethan had a wonderful time with you today. Thank you for showing him around." James nodded, a faint smile softening his features. "It was nice having someone to show things to," he admitted quietly. There was a moment of awkward silence before Alexander rose from his chair. "James, why don't you take Ethan to select a book from the library to borrow? Something about astronomy, perhaps? Mrs. Miller and I will join you in a few minutes." Once the boys had left, Alexander led Sarah to a small sitting area adjacent to the dining room. "I hope today has been informative," he said, gesturing for her to take a seat on an elegant love seat. "Has it helped clarify your thoughts about the position?" Sarah sat, smoothing her dress over her knees. "In some ways, yes. I can see that James is a good kid who's hurting. I can see why you think Ethan might be good for him." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But there's still something I don't quite understand. Why me? Out of all the qualified people you could hire, why choose a struggling single mother with no experience managing a household like this?" Alexander didn't answer immediately. He moved to a side table where a decanter of amber liquid sat beside crystal glasses. "May I offer you a brandy?" "No, thank you." He poured himself a small measure and took a sip before turning back to her. "Let me tell you about my brother, Peter." It wasn't the response she had expected, but Sarah remained silent, waiting. "Peter was 3 years younger than me. From childhood, we were raised to view life as a competition, for our parents' approval, for academic achievement, for professional success." Alexander's voice took on a distant quality, as if he was seeing the past unfold before him. "I followed our father's path into business. I was good at it, ruthless when necessary. But Peter was different. He rebelled against our parents' expectations, chose to teach history at a small college, married for love rather than advantage." Alexander swirled the brandy in his glass, watching the light play through the crystal. "Our parents were furious. They cut him off financially. I was tasked with trying to bring him to his senses." A faint smile touched his lips. "Instead, his sense brought me to. He showed me there was another way to live, with integrity, with genuine connection to others." He set his glass down, untouched, and moved to sit across from Sarah. "When James was born, I saw my brother become the father we had never had. Present, affectionate, putting his child's needs above his own ambition. His gray eyes met hers directly. The same qualities I saw in you at the pawn shop. "But you couldn't have known anything about me?" Sarah objected. "I knew enough. I knew you were willing to part with something precious to you, not for yourself, but for your child. In my experience, that kind of selfless love is rare. It can't be faked or bought." Alexander leaned forward slightly. "When Peter died, I promised to give James the kind of home my brother had created for him, but I can't do it alone. I need someone who understands intuitively what that means." The sincerity in his voice was compelling, but Sarah still felt there was more he wasn't telling her. Before she could press further, Thomas appeared to announce that the car was ready. The goodbyes were surprisingly emotional. James, who had found a book on constellations for Ethan, seemed reluctant to see them leave. He hovered in the grand entrance hall, hands shoved into his pockets, shoulders hunched in that particularly teenage way. "Maybe you could come back on Saturday," he suggested to Ethan, trying to sound casual. "There's a meteor shower that night. It's supposed to be really good." Ethan looked to Sarah, hope written plainly on his face. "We'll let you know," she promised, touched by the connection that had formed between the boys. "Thank you for everything, James. You've been a wonderful host." To her surprise, James stepped forward and gave Ethan a quick, awkward hug. See you soon, maybe," he mumbled before retreating up the grand staircase, offering a final wave from the landing. Alexander walked them to the waiting car. "I won't pressure you for an answer now," he said to Sarah. "Take time to discuss it with Ethan, to consider what's best for both of you." He handed her a thick envelope. "This contains all the information you'll need. Details about the position, the contract, information about Westfield Academy for Ethan. My private number is there as well, should you have any questions." Sarah accepted the envelope, acutely aware of how much her life had changed in just 2 days. "Thank you for today, for everything." Alexander's expression softened in a way she hadn't seen before. "The gratitude is mine, Sarah. Regardless of your decision, seeing James connect with your son today has been significant." He hesitated, then added, "I believe in fate, in things happening for a reason. Perhaps there was a reason you were in that pawn shop when I walked in." The drive back to the city was quiet, with Ethan falling asleep against Sarah's shoulder before they'd even left the estate's grounds. She gazed out the window as the landscape transformed from manicured gardens to suburbs to the familiar, grittier outlines of their neighborhood. The contrast was stark, a visual reminder of the choice before her. When they arrived at their apartment building, Thomas insisted on carrying the sleeping Ethan up the stairs despite Sarah's protests. Once Ethan was tucked into his bed, still clutching the astronomy book, Sarah thanked the driver and saw him out. The apartment seemed smaller than she remembered, its limitations more apparent after a day spent in Alexander's mansion. But it was home, the place where she'd raised Ethan, where they'd built their life together despite the challenges. Sarah made herself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, spreading out the contents of the envelope Alexander had given her. The contract was straightforward but generous, outlining a salary and benefits package that would forever change their financial situation. There were brochures about Westfield Academy, showing smiling children in crisp uniforms engaged in art, sports, and academics. Photos of the campus revealed state-of-the-art facilities that public schools like Ethan's current one could only dream of. A soft knock at the door interrupted her review. It was Mrs. Wilkins coming to check on Ethan. "I saw the fancy car drop you off," the elderly woman said as Sarah invited her in. "How's our boy doing?" "Much better," Sarah assured her. "The medicine worked wonders. He's sleeping now. Had quite an exciting day." Mrs. Wilkins settled at the table, her shrewd eyes taking in the spread of papers. "Looks like you did too. What's all this?" Sarah hesitated, then decided she could use a trusted perspective. She explained about Alexander, the job offer, the estate, and James, watching Mrs. Wilkins's expression cycle through disbelief, concern, and finally thoughtful consideration. "So this rich fellow wants to hire you to look after his nephew and run his household," Mrs. Wilkins summarized. "And you and Ethan would live in his mansion, with Ethan going to some fancy private school." "That's the offer," Sarah confirmed. "It sounds almost too good to be true." Mrs. Wilkins snorted softly. "In my experience, things that sound too good to be true usually are, but not always." She reached across the table and patted Sarah's hand. "You're a smart girl, Sarah. You've been through the ringer these past few years, raising that boy on your own. You've got good instincts. What are they telling you about this man and his offer?" Sarah considered the question. "That he's genuinely concerned about his nephew. That he's not quite what he seems on the surface. There's a sadness in him behind all the wealth and power." "And do you trust him?" "I think I do," Sarah said, somewhat surprised by her own answer. "He returned my wedding ring today. He didn't have to do that. And he's been straightforward about what he wants from me. Stability for James, a family environment." Mrs. Wilkins nodded slowly. "And Ethan? How does he feel about all this?" "He loved the estate, and he really connected with James. But it would mean so many changes. New school, new home, new people." "Children are resilient," Mrs. Wilkins observed, "more so than we give them credit for. And it sounds like this would give him opportunities you couldn't provide otherwise." That's what I keep thinking, Sarah admitted. But is it selfish of me to consider it? To uproot him from everything familiar for the promise of a better life? Mrs. Wilkins chuckled softly. Selfish? Girl, you're the least selfish person I know. You've sacrificed everything for that boy. Her expression grew serious. Sometimes the best thing we can do for our children is to make the hard choices that open doors for them. My Charlie and I moved halfway across the country when our kids were small, for a job opportunity. It was terrifying, leaving our family and friends behind. But it turned out to be the best decision we ever made. After Mrs. Wilkins left, Sarah checked on Ethan, smiling at the sight of him curled around the astronomy book, his face peaceful in sleep. She gently brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, thinking about all she wanted for him: security, education, opportunities to pursue his interests, a life not constrained by constant financial worry. Alexander's offer would provide all of that and more, but it would also mean entangling their lives with his, becoming part of a world so different from their own. Could she navigate that world without losing herself? Could she give Ethan roots in a place built on privilege when she'd raised him to value simplicity and hard work? Her phone chimed with a text message. It was from the bank, confirming that Alexander's check had cleared and the funds were now available in her accounts. $1 million, a sum that could change everything, even if she declined the job offer. Sarah sat on the edge of Ethan's bed watching him sleep, remembering all the nights she'd done this same thing, worrying about bills, about his future, about how to give him the life he deserved. She thought about James, so clearly in need of the kind of love and stability she knew how to provide. She thought about Alexander, the complicated man behind the powerful facade, trying in his own way to honor his brother's memory. By the time the first light of dawn filtered through Ethan's curtains, Sarah had made her decision. When Ethan woke the next morning, Sarah was ready with his favorite breakfast: blueberry pancakes with real maple syrup, a luxury they could now afford. As he dug in eagerly, she broached the subject that had kept her up most of the night. "Ethan, we need to talk about Mr. Donovan's offer," she began, sliding into the chair across from him. "About the job and living at his house." Ethan looked up, syrup glistening on his chin. "Are we going to take it?" "That depends. I want to know how you feel about it." Sarah reached across the table and took his small hand in hers. "It would mean big changes for us. A new home, a new school for you, new people in our lives." Ethan considered this, his expression surprisingly thoughtful for a 7-year-old. "Would I still get to see Tommy and Lucas sometimes?" "We'd make sure of it," Sarah promised. "We wouldn't be moving far away, and they could visit us at the estate." "Would I have to share my room with James?" Sarah smiled. "No, you'd have your own room. The one we saw yesterday, remember? With the big window seat?" Ethan nodded, then asked the question Sarah hadn't expected. "Would you be happier there, Mom? You wouldn't have to work so much?" A lump formed in Sarah's throat. Even at his young age, Ethan had noticed how tired she was, how stretched thin by multiple jobs and constant worry. "I would work there, but yes, it would be different. Less stressful in some ways." "I liked James," Ethan said after a moment of contemplation. "He's sad, but he's nice. He said he'd teach me about the stars." "He did seem to like you very much," Sarah agreed. "And Mr. Donovan is kind of scary, but in a good way, like a superhero." Ethan's assessment made Sarah laugh despite herself. "He helped us get my medicine." "He did," Sarah acknowledged. Ethan took another bite of pancake, chewing thoughtfully. "I think we should go," he said finally. "James needs friends, and you need not to be so tired all the time." Sarah blinked back tears, moved by her son's perception and selflessness. "You're sure? Because we only do this if we both agree." Ethan nodded decisively. "I'm sure. Can I bring my robot collection?" "Of course," Sarah laughed, relief washing over her. "We can bring anything you want." By mid-morning, Sarah had called Alexander's private number. He answered on the second ring, as if he'd been waiting for her call. "Mrs. Miller," he greeted her, his deep voice instantly recognizable. "How are you and Ethan today?" "We're well, thank you," Sarah replied, suddenly nervous. We've made a decision about your offer." There was a brief silence on the line. "And?" "We'd like to accept, if the position is still available." "It is." Alexander's voice warmed slightly. "I'm very pleased to hear this, Sarah. When would you like to start?" They agreed on a timeline, 2 weeks to handle the details of moving out of the apartment, withdrawing Ethan from his current school, and making the transition to the estate. Alexander promised to send the Westfield Academy paperwork immediately and assured her that the rooms would be ready whenever they were. "James will be delighted," he added before ending the call. "As am I." The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Sarah gave notice at the diner, receiving tearful hugs from co-workers who'd become friends over the years. She withdrew Ethan from his school, explaining to his confused teacher that he'd received a scholarship to Westfield, a simpler explanation than the full, unbelievable truth. Sorting through their belongings was a bittersweet process. Their small apartment had accumulated the artifacts of their life together. Ethan's baby clothes that Sarah had never been able to part with, crafts he'd made in preschool, the second-hand furniture she'd so carefully selected to make their space a home. "We don't need to take everything," she'd explained to Ethan. "The estate is already furnished. But we'll bring the special things. Your toys, our books, the quilt Grandma made for you." Mrs. Wilkins helped them pack, offering advice and moral support in equal measure. "Change is always hard," she said, carefully wrapping Sarah's few pieces of good china in newspaper. "But sometimes it's necessary for growth." Tommy and Lucas came over for a farewell playdate, their eyes wide as Ethan described the estate with all the wonder of a child who'd glimpsed a fairy tale. Their mother, Diane, pulled Sarah aside as the boys played. "Is this for real?" she asked, her expression a mixture of concern and awe. "You're really going to live in some millionaire's mansion and run his household?" "Billionaire, actually," Sarah corrected with a self-conscious laugh. "And yes, it's real. I still can't quite believe it myself." Diane shook her head in amazement. "Well, if anyone deserves a break like this, it's you. Just be careful, okay? Men like that are used to getting what they want." Sarah understood the warning behind her friend's words. "It's strictly professional," she assured Diane. "He needs help with his nephew, and I need financial stability for Ethan. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement." But as the moving day approached, Sarah found herself wondering if it really was that simple. The few times she'd spoken with Alexander by phone to arrange details, she'd been struck by the complexity of the man, the formality that occasionally gave way to unexpected warmth, the careful control that sometimes slipped to reveal something more vulnerable beneath. On their final evening in the apartment, after Ethan had fallen asleep surrounded by packed boxes, Sarah stood at the window, looking out at the city lights. Everything was changing. The $1 million from her wedding ring sat in a high-yield savings account, a security blanket she'd barely had to touch thanks to the advance Alexander had provided to cover moving expenses. Tomorrow, she and Ethan would leave this modest apartment for a mansion beyond anything they'd ever imagined. Was she making the right choice? Only time would tell. The next morning, a moving truck arrived to collect their belongings, followed by the now familiar limousine with Thomas at the wheel. Mrs. Wilkins dabbed at her eyes as she hugged them goodbye. "You call me if you need anything," she insisted, pressing a small package into Sarah's hands. "A little housewarming gift for your new place." "We'll visit often," Sarah promised, fighting back her own tears. "And you're welcome at the estate any time." The drive to Donovan Estate was quieter than their previous journey. Ethan sat beside her, his favorite teddy bear clutched in one arm, his eyes taking in the passing scenery with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Sarah felt a similar jumble of emotions, anticipation, uncertainty, and a strange sense of destiny, as if this path had been waiting for them all along. As the limousine turned onto the private drive, Sarah glimpsed movement at the top of the grand entrance steps. James was waiting, shifting from foot to foot with poorly concealed eagerness. Beside him stood Alexander, as imposing as ever in a charcoal suit, his expression unreadable until the car drew closer. Then, for just a moment, Sarah saw a smile transform his features, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and softened the hard angles of his face. "Welcome home," Alexander said simply as Thomas opened the car door. Home. Such a small word for such a momentous change. The first days at the estate were a whirlwind of adjustment. Mrs. Reynolds proved an invaluable guide, patiently explaining the routines of the household, introducing Sarah to the staff, the chef, the groundskeeper, the weekly cleaning service, and helping Ethan settle into his new room. James, initially shy again after his initial enthusiasm, gradually warmed up as Ethan's natural exuberance broke through his reserve. By the end of the first week, the sound of their laughter echoing through the previously quiet halls had become a regular occurrence. "You've already made a difference," Alexander observed one evening, finding Sarah in the library where she'd been reviewing Ethan's enrollment paperwork for Westfield. "I haven't heard James laugh like that since before the accident." Sarah looked up from the forms, struck anew by how Alexander could appear so suddenly, moving with a quiet grace that belied his powerful frame. "He's a great kid," she said. "He just needs to feel secure again." Alexander nodded, moving to stand by the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. "Security is a fragile thing, easy to lose, difficult to rebuild." There was something personal in his tone that made Sarah wonder if he was speaking from experience. "The boys seem to be bonding well?" she said, changing the subject slightly. "Ethan's thrilled about the stargazing plans for tonight." "Yes, James has been preparing all day. He's cleaned his telescope lenses 3 times. Alexander turned to face her, his expression more open than usual. "Thank you, Sarah, for taking this chance, for bringing Ethan into James's life. And into yours?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Alexander's gaze held hers for a long moment. "Yes," he said finally, "into mine as well." There was a weight to his words that Sarah wasn't ready to examine too closely. Instead, she returned to the enrollment forms, aware of Alexander watching her for a few moments longer before he quietly left the library. That night, after helping James and Ethan set up the telescope on the lawn, Sarah stood back, watching as the older boy patiently showed Ethan how to locate different celestial bodies. The summer night was warm, crickets chirping in the carefully tended gardens, the scent of roses drifting on the light breeze. "They look happy," Alexander's voice came from behind her, and Sarah turned to find him standing a few feet away, his tie loosened, jacket gone, looking more relaxed than she'd seen him before. "They do," she agreed, turning back to watch the boys. James was pointing out something in the night sky, Ethan's face upturned in wonder. "And you?" Alexander moved to stand beside her. "Are you happy here, Sarah?" It was too soon to answer definitively, but Sarah considered the past week, the relief of not worrying about bills, the joy of seeing Ethan flourish in this new environment, the satisfaction of bringing some warmth to James's life. "I think I could be," she said honestly. "It's all still very new." Alexander nodded, accepting her cautious response. Change takes time, adjustment, trust. He looked toward the boys, his profile sharp against the starlit sky. "All I ask is that you give it a chance, that we all do." Something in his words, the inclusion of himself in the adjustment process, touched Sarah unexpectedly. This powerful man, used to controlling every aspect of his environment, was acknowledging his own need to adapt to the new dynamic they were creating. "I will," she promised. And she meant it. As the weeks passed, a routine began to establish itself. Weekday mornings were a carefully orchestrated dance of getting both boys ready for school, with Sarah gradually taking over more of the household management duties from Mrs. Reynolds. The older woman seemed relieved rather than resentful, confiding to Sarah that she'd been hoping to reduce her responsibilities for some time. "These old bones aren't what they used to be," she admitted one morning as she showed Sarah how to coordinate with the various service providers who maintained the estate. "It's good to have someone younger taking charge." Alexander traveled frequently for business, but when he was home, Sarah noticed how he made a point of joining them for dinner, asking the boys about their days, listening with genuine interest to their stories. His relationship with James was improving gradually, the awkwardness giving way to moments of real connection. A month into their new life at Donovan Estate, Sarah stood in Ethan's room, helping him select an outfit for his first day at Westfield Academy. The school uniform, crisp navy pants, white shirt, and blazer with the school crest, hung ready on his closet door. "Are you excited?" she asked, smoothing a cowlick in his hair that refused to stay down. "Kinda," Ethan admitted, fidgeting with his new backpack. "James says the teachers are nice and they have a really cool science lab with real microscopes." "That sounds wonderful," Sarah smiled, masking her own nerves. Westfield was an elite institution, attended by the children of the wealthiest and most influential families in the region. Would her son be accepted there? Would he fit in with classmates whose lives had been so different from his own? "Mom?" Ethan's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "What if the other kids don't like me?" Sarah knelt down, placing her hands on his shoulders. "Ethan Miller, you are smart, kind, and the most likable boy I've ever known. Anyone would be lucky to be your friend. And remember, James will be there too." Ethan nodded, bolstered by her confidence and the mention of James, who had become something of a hero to him over the past weeks. The boys had grown surprisingly close, with James seeming to flourish in his role as mentor to the younger child. A knock at the door revealed Alexander, impeccably dressed despite the early hour. "May I come in? I wanted to wish Ethan good luck on his first day." "Mr. Donovan!" Ethan brightened. "Do you like my uniform? Mom says I look very distinguished." "Indeed you do," Alexander agreed, his usual reserve softening as it often did around Ethan. "Westfield is lucky to have you." He held out a small gift bag. "I thought you might like to have this for your first day." Ethan eagerly opened the present, gasping when he pulled out a sleek digital watch. "Wow, it's just like James's." "It has some special features," Alexander explained, crouching down to Ethan's level. "If you press this button, it shows you the phases of the moon, and this one has a compass in case you ever need to find your way." "Thank you!" Ethan threw his arms around Alexander's neck in an impulsive hug. Sarah watched in surprise as Alexander, after a moment of startled stillness, returned the embrace, his large hand gently patting Ethan's back. When the boys had been dropped off at school, Alexander insisting on accompanying them personally for the first day, a gesture that clearly meant a lot to both James and Ethan, Sarah returned to the estate, still marveling at the scene she'd witnessed that morning. In the weeks they'd been living there, she'd seen Alexander gradually lower his guard around Ethan, responding to the boy's natural affection with increasing warmth. With the boys at school and the household running smoothly under Mrs. Reynolds's experienced guidance, Sarah found herself with unexpected free time. After catching up on some correspondence, including an email to Diane with an update on their new life, she decided to explore more of the estate she now called home. She wandered into the West Wing, an area she hadn't spent much time in yet. Unlike the warm, lived-in feel of the family quarters, this section of the mansion had a more formal atmosphere, with elegant antiques and valuable artwork. Sarah passed several closed doors before coming to one that was slightly ajar, revealing a glimpse of what appeared to be a portrait gallery. Curiosity drew her in. The large room was lined with paintings of people who shared Alexander's distinctive features: the straight nose, strong jawline, and those penetrating gray eyes. Generations of Donovans looked down from gilt frames, their expressions ranging from stern to contemplative. Near the end of the gallery, Sarah stopped before a portrait of two young men, Alexander, perhaps in his early 20s, and beside him, a slightly younger man with the same dark hair but warmer, more approachable features. This had to be Peter, Alexander's brother and James's father. "That was painted the year I graduated from business school." Alexander's voice came from behind her, making Sarah start slightly. "Peter was still in college. Our parents commissioned it as a gift." "You look so young," Sarah observed, turning to face him. "And very serious." "I was serious, determined to prove myself worthy of the Donovan name." Alexander moved to stand beside her, looking up at the portrait. Peter was the opposite, always laughing, always questioning why things couldn't be different. I envied that about him. The admission surprised Sarah. "You envied your younger brother?" "His freedom, his courage to chart his own course." Alexander's gaze remained on the painting. "Our father had my life planned out from the day I was born, which schools I would attend, which career I would pursue, which social circles I would move in. I never questioned it. Peter did." "And that's why your parents cut him off? Because he wanted a different life?" Alexander nodded. "He rejected everything they valued: status, wealth, influence. When he announced he was going to teach at a small college instead of joining the family business, our father was livid. When he married Catherine, a nurse with no family connections to speak of, it was the final straw." Sarah studied Alexander's profile, noting the tension in his jaw. "But you didn't cut him off." "No." Alexander turned to meet her gaze. "Peter helped me see that our parents' values weren't the only ones worth having. It was too late for me to change course. I was already established in business, already becoming the man our father had shaped me to be. But I could support Peter's choices, be the brother he deserved." There was a vulnerability in his expression that moved Sarah. She was beginning to understand the complex man behind the powerful exterior, a man shaped by expectations, driven by duty, yet haunted by glimpses of a different kind of life. "James has a lot of his father in him," she said gently. "Yes, and that terrifies me." Alexander ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of discomposure. "I don't know how to nurture those qualities. I only know how to teach him what I was taught: discipline, focus, ambition." "That's why I'm here," Sarah reminded him, surprised by her own boldness. "To provide the things you can't." Alexander's gaze softened. "Yes, that's exactly why you're here." The moment was interrupted by Mrs. Reynolds, who appeared at the gallery door. "Excuse me, Mr. Donovan, Mrs. Miller, there's a call for you, sir. Mr. Harrington about the Tokyo acquisition." Alexander's expression immediately shifted back to its usual composed state. "Thank you, Mrs. Reynolds. I'll take it in my study." He turned to Sarah. "We'll continue this conversation another time." As he strode away, Sarah remained in the gallery, contemplating the portrait of the two brothers and the glimpse she'd just received into Alexander's private thoughts. That evening, after the boys had returned from school, Ethan bubbling with excitement about his new classroom, and James quietly pleased about a compliment from his science teacher, Alexander invited Sarah to join him in his study after dinner. "There's something I need to discuss with you," he explained as she took a seat across from his desk. "I'm hosting a dinner party here on Saturday. Several business associates and their spouses. It's been planned for months before your arrival." "I'll make sure everything is prepared," Sarah assured him, already mentally listing the arrangements she would need to coordinate with Mrs. Reynolds and the chef. "That's not why I'm mentioning it." Alexander looked slightly uncomfortable. "These are people I've known for years, many from my father's generation. They're traditional in their outlook. They'll be curious about you and your role here." Sarah understood his concern. "You're worried about how they'll perceive me. A single mother with no qualifications suddenly managing your household and helping raise your nephew." "Their opinion doesn't matter to me," Alexander said firmly, "but I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. They can be judgmental. I appreciate the warning, Sarah replied, touched by his consideration. But I'm not easily intimidated, Mr. Donovan. She emphasized his formal title with a small smile. I'll make sure they understand my role here is entirely professional. Alexander studied her for a moment, then nodded. I've never doubted your strength, Sarah. It's one of your most admirable qualities. Despite her confident words to Alexander, Sarah spent the days leading up to the dinner party in a state of carefully concealed anxiety. Mrs. Reynolds was enormously helpful, briefing her on each expected guest and their connections to the Donovan family. Mr. Harrington was a close friend of the late Mr. Donovan, the housekeeper explained as they reviewed the guest list. Very old money, very set in his ways. His wife, Eleanor, serves on several charity boards with Mr. Donovan's mother. Alexander's mother will be here? Sarah asked, surprised. In all their conversations, Alexander had rarely mentioned his mother, and never in terms of current contact. Yes, Mrs. Donovan returns from Europe for these quarterly gatherings. It's tradition. Mrs. Reynolds hesitated. She can be formidable. That seemed an understatement based on what Alexander had shared about his upbringing, but Sarah simply nodded and continued with the preparations. On Saturday evening, Sarah helped Ethan with his bow tie and James with his cufflinks before sending them downstairs to greet the arriving guests. She had arranged for them to make a brief appearance before dinner, then eat separately in the family dining room and retire to the game room with a movie. For herself, Sarah had chosen a simple but elegant black dress, purchased with Alexander's encouragement when he'd handed her a credit card for any personal needs. It was the most expensive clothing she'd ever owned, but standing before the mirror in her room, she had to admit it was worth every penny. The classic design flattered her figure without being flashy, projecting exactly the image of capable professionalism she wanted to convey. When she descended the grand staircase, the entrance hall was already filled with elegantly dressed guests sipping champagne. Alexander, resplendent in a tailored tuxedo, stood at the center of a small group. He looked up as she approached, a flash of something like appreciation in his eyes before he composed his features. "Sarah," he greeted her, extending his hand to draw her into the circle. "Allow me to introduce you. This is William Harrington and his wife, Eleanor, Charles and Margaret Blake, and my mother, Victoria Donovan." 5 pairs of eyes assessed her with varying degrees of curiosity, and in Victoria Donovan's case, undisguised suspicion. Alexander's mother was a slender, elegant woman in her 60s, with silver-streaked dark hair swept into a chignon and the same penetrating gray eyes as her son. She extended a hand adorned with a diamond ring the size of a small pebble. "So you're the new household manager?" she said, her voice cultured but cool. "Alexander has told us so little about you." Sarah shook her hand firmly, meeting that intimidating gaze directly. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Donovan. Your son has been a wonderful employer." "Indeed?" Victoria arched a perfectly shaped eyebrow. "And how exactly did you come to be employed here? Alexander mentioned something about your son and James becoming friends?" Before Sarah could respond to Victoria's pointed question, Alexander smoothly intervened. "Mother, this isn't the time for an interrogation. Sarah has been invaluable since joining our household. James has shown remarkable improvement, both emotionally and academically." Victoria's expression remained skeptical. "Well, I suppose results speak for themselves. Though I still don't understand why you didn't select someone from the agencies I recommended." "Sometimes the best candidates come from unexpected places," Alexander replied, his tone polite but firm. "Sarah, why don't you check on the boys before dinner? I believe James was going to show Ethan his new computer game." Recognizing the graceful exit he was offering, Sarah nodded and excused herself. As she moved away, she heard Eleanor Harrington's not-quite-whispered comment. "She's certainly attractive. Are you sure there isn't more to this arrangement, Alexander?" Sarah didn't hear his response, but the implication was clear. The guests viewed her with suspicion, perhaps assuming she had manipulated her way into Alexander's household, or worse, that she was more than just an employee. She found the boys in the family room, James showing Ethan a complex strategy game on his laptop. Both looked up when she entered. "Mom, James is teaching me how to build a whole civilization." Ethan's enthusiasm was untouched by any awareness of the social tensions swirling elsewhere in the house. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Sarah smiled, grateful for her son's capacity for joy. "Are you both doing okay? Dinner for the grown-ups will be starting soon." James nodded, his expression solemn. "We're fine. Mrs. Reynolds brought us sandwiches and cookies." He hesitated, then added, "Is grandmother being difficult?" The question caught Sarah off guard. "Why do you ask that?" "She always is." James shrugged with forced nonchalance. "She thinks Uncle Alex is too soft with me, that I should be in boarding school like he was, learning to be a proper Donovan." Sarah's heart ached at the boy's matter-of-fact assessment. "Your uncle wants what's best for you, James, and right now that's being here, at home." "Because of you and Ethan," James said, not as a question but a statement of fact. "Things are better since you came." The simple declaration warmed Sarah. Whatever Victoria Donovan or the other guests might think of her, James's opinion was what truly mattered. "I'm glad you feel that way," she said softly. "Now, you two enjoy your game. I'll come check on you after dinner." Returning to the gathering, Sarah found that the guests had moved to the formal dining room. She entered quietly, taking the empty seat Alexander had saved for her near his end of the table. The conversation flowed around her. Talk of stock portfolios, vacation homes in exotic locations, the latest political intrigues, while footmen served course after exquisite course. Sarah participated when addressed directly but mostly observed, taking in the dynamics of Alexander's social circle. These were people who had known him for years, who had been friends with his parents, who moved in the rarefied world he inhabited. Yet there was little warmth in their interactions, none of the genuine connection she'd begun to see between Alexander and James, or even between Alexander and Ethan. "Sarah," Victoria's voice cut through her thoughts. "Alexander tells me your son has started at Westfield. That's an exceptional opportunity for a child from your background." The slight pause spoke volumes. Sarah took a sip of water, composing her response. "Yes, Ethan is thrilled with the school. He's particularly excited about their science program." "Science?" William Harrington chimed in. "Good field, practical, though if he's serious about his future, he should focus on business or law. That's where the real opportunities are." "Ethan is 7, Sarah replied evenly. "Right now, I'm more concerned with fostering his natural curiosity than mapping out his career path." "An admirable sentiment," Charles Blake said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Though in families like ours, it's never too early to begin shaping the next generation." "Sarah isn't interested in our family traditions, Charles," Alexander interjected. "She has her own values when it comes to raising children, values I've come to respect greatly." The subtle emphasis on respect silenced further commentary on the topic. Sarah glanced at Alexander, surprised by his defense. He met her gaze briefly, something like apology in his eyes before he smoothly redirected the conversation to a recent art acquisition. As the dinner progressed, Sarah noted how effortlessly Alexander navigated these social waters, maintaining his status while deflecting the more intrusive questions and comments. Yet she also observed the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes. Signs that this performance was exactly that. A performance, not a genuine expression of himself. After dessert, the men retreated to Alexander's study for brandy, while the women moved to the drawing room. Sarah found herself seated beside Victoria on an antique sofa, the older woman's scrutiny almost tangible. "I'll be direct, Mrs. Miller," Victoria said once they were settled. "I've known Alexander his entire life. He doesn't make impulsive decisions. Yet he installed you and your son in his home after what I understand was a very brief acquaintance. I find that concerning." "I understand your concern," Sarah replied, meeting Victoria's gaze steadily. "Alexander entrusted me with significant responsibilities based on what he saw as compatible values regarding James's upbringing. I take that trust seriously." "Values?" Victoria's perfectly manicured eyebrow arched. "What exactly does Alexander value about you?" The question carried insinuation, but Sarah refused to be baited. "I believe he values my commitment to putting children's needs first, my willingness to provide the stable, nurturing environment James requires. Things Alexander feels he can't provide himself? Things that his business responsibilities make difficult to provide consistently," Sarah countered diplomatically. Victoria studied her for a long moment. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect, Mrs. Donovan?" "Someone more easily intimidated. Someone looking to secure her position through flattery or deference." A hint of reluctant respect entered Victoria's tone. "You genuinely care about James, don't you?" "I do," Sarah said simply. "He's a remarkable boy who's endured a terrible loss. He deserves to feel secure and valued." Victoria nodded slowly. "Peter and Catherine did a wonderful job with him in the early years. Their loss was devastating." For the first time, genuine emotion flickered across her aristocratic features. "Alexander tries, but he doesn't know how to connect with James. He never learned." She trailed off, but Sarah understood what remained unsaid. Alexander had never learned how to show affection, how to forge emotional bonds, because Victoria and her husband had never taught him. Before the conversation could continue, the men rejoined them, and soon the evening was drawing to a close, with guests offering polite goodbyes and air kisses. Alexander's mother was the last to leave, pausing at the door to speak privately with her son. Sarah couldn't hear their exchange, but the tension in Alexander's posture was evident even from across the entrance hall. After the final guest departed, Alexander loosened his bow tie with a sigh of what seemed like relief. "Thank you for your help tonight, Sarah. You handled a challenging situation with grace." "Your mother is formidable," Sarah acknowledged. "That's a diplomatic way of putting it." Alexander's mouth quirked in a sardonic half-smile. "She's convinced you have ulterior motives. I assured her our arrangement is strictly professional." "And does she believe you?" "Probably not. My mother views everything through the lens of advantage and strategy. She can't comprehend making a decision based on what's best for a child rather than what's best for the family name or fortune." Sarah hesitated, then asked the question that had been nagging at her all evening. "Is that why you never married? Because you saw marriage as your parents saw it, a strategic alliance rather than a relationship based on love?" Alexander looked startled by her directness. "That's perceptive of you." He moved to the sideboard in the hallway, pouring himself a small measure of brandy. "I had opportunities, of course. Women my mother deemed suitable, but after seeing the difference between my parents' marriage and what Peter found with Catherine—" He shook his head. "I couldn't settle for less than what my brother had, and in my world that kind of connection is rare." The vulnerability in his admission touched Sarah. For all his wealth and power, Alexander Donovan was in some ways deeply alone, shaped by an upbringing that had taught him to value achievement over connection, duty over joy. "I should check on the boys," she said after a moment. "It's getting late." Alexander nodded, still looking thoughtful. "Sarah," he called as she turned to go, "my mother asked about your background, how we met." "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That I saw you willing to part with something precious to help your child, and I recognized the kind of person I wanted in James's life." He met her gaze directly. "I don't regret my decision. Tonight only confirmed it was the right one." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her at his words. "Thank you. Good night, Alexander." As September gave way to October, life at Donovan Estate settled into a comfortable rhythm. Ethan thrived at Westfield, making friends and developing a particular interest in his science classes. James, always a capable student, showed renewed enthusiasm for school, his grades improving along with his social engagement. He had even joined the astronomy club, something he'd resisted the previous year. Sarah found her role expanding beyond the original parameters Alexander had outlined. She was still responsible for the household management and James's day-to-day needs, but increasingly, Alexander sought her input on matters concerning his nephew, everything from academic choices to how to handle nightmares that still occasionally plagued the boy. "You have an instinct for this that I lack," he admitted one evening, after Sarah had helped James navigate a conflict with a school friend. "The emotional aspects of parenting. It's not instinct so much as experience," Sarah replied, "and being willing to listen more than talk." Alexander took this observation seriously, making visible efforts to listen more carefully to James, to ask questions rather than issue directives. The change in their relationship was subtle but significant, a new ease developing between uncle and nephew. Sarah couldn't help but notice changes in Alexander himself. The formality that had characterized his early interactions with her gradually gave way to a more relaxed demeanor, at least within the privacy of the family quarters. He laughed more frequently, particularly at Ethan's uninhibited commentary on the world. He began joining them for casual activities, movie nights in the home theater, weekend picnics by the lake when weather permitted, even an impromptu soccer game on the lawn that had left him with grass stains on his usually immaculate trousers and a rare, carefree smile. One crisp autumn afternoon, Sarah was in the greenhouse, helping Mrs. Reynolds select flowers for the dining table, when she spotted Alexander and the boys through the glass panels. They were at the edge of the gardens, Alexander demonstrating how to skip stones across the lake's surface. As she watched, Ethan made an attempt that ended with a splash rather than a skip, spraying water toward James, who laughed and retaliated with a splash of his own. To Sarah's astonishment, Alexander joined in, scooping Ethan up and pretending to threaten him with a dunking, the boys' delighted shrieks carrying across the distance. "Well, would you look at that?" Mrs. Reynolds murmured beside her, her tone wondering. I've never seen him like that," Mrs. Reynolds continued, her eyes misty with emotion. "Not even when he was a boy himself. The Donovans didn't believe in frivolity." Sarah nodded, unable to tear her gaze away from the scene. In that moment, Alexander looked nothing like the formidable businessman she had first met in the pawn shop. His guard completely lowered, his face alight with genuine joy. He seemed younger, freer, a glimpse of the man he might have been had his childhood allowed for such simple pleasures. "Your coming here has changed him," Mrs. Reynolds said softly. "Changed this whole house, brought life back into it." Before Sarah could respond, Ethan spotted her through the greenhouse glass and waved enthusiastically, calling out for her to join them. Alexander looked up, following Ethan's gaze, and raised his hand in a more restrained but equally inviting gesture. "Go on," Mrs. Reynolds urged with a smile. "I can finish the arrangements." As Sarah approached the lakeside, Alexander's expression shifted subtly, the unguarded joy giving way to something more complex, a warmth tinged with self-consciousness, as if he'd been caught in an uncharacteristic moment. "Mom, Mr. Donovan taught us how to skip stones," Ethan exclaimed, his jacket damp from their water play. "I got one to bounce 3 times." "Impressive," Sarah replied, smiling at her son's enthusiasm, "though it looks like you all got a little carried away." "It was worth it," Alexander said, his gray eyes meeting hers with surprising directness. "Some experiences are worth getting a little wet for." Something in his tone suggested he wasn't just talking about stone skipping, and Sarah felt a flutter of awareness that had become increasingly common in Alexander's presence. She'd been so focused on settling Ethan into their new life, on helping James heal, that she'd scarcely acknowledged how her own feelings toward Alexander had evolved. from wariness to respect to something warmer and more complicated. As autumn deepened into winter, these moments of connection with Alexander grew more frequent. They found themselves lingering over coffee after the boys left for school, or sharing quiet conversations in the library in the evenings after the household had settled for the night. He began to share more of himself, stories of his childhood, insights into his business concerns, even occasional doubts about decisions he'd made. Sarah, in turn, found herself opening up about her own past, her brief marriage to Daniel, her struggles as a single mother, her dreams for Ethan's future. Alexander listened with a quality of attention she'd rarely experienced, as if her words mattered deeply to him. One snowy December evening, when the boys were engrossed in a movie marathon in the home theater, Alexander invited Sarah to join him in his study. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. 2 glasses of wine waited on the small table between the leather armchairs. "I wanted to discuss the holiday plans," he explained as she took a seat. "James has been asking if we could host a Christmas party for some of his friends from school. It would be the first time he's wanted to entertain since the accident." "That sounds wonderful," Sarah replied, touched by this evidence of James's continued healing. "I think it would be good for him." "I agree." Alexander handed her a glass of wine. "I also wanted to ask about your Christmas traditions with Ethan. I don't want our customs here to overshadow what's important to you both." The consideration in his question moved her. "That's thoughtful of you. Honestly, our traditions have been simple by necessity. A small tree, homemade ornaments, one special gift each. It's more about being together than anything elaborate." Alexander nodded, his expression contemplative. "Family was never the center of Christmas in my childhood. It was another opportunity for social display, parties, formal dinners, precisely selected gifts that demonstrated appropriate taste and status." A shadow crossed his face, until Peter broke away and created something different with Catherine and James. "And now you have the chance to create something new," Sarah said gently. "Something that honors Peter's values and creates good memories for James." "For James and Ethan," Alexander corrected, his eyes meeting hers over the rim of his wineglass. "This is their home now, both of them." The simple declaration warmed Sarah more than the fire or the wine. Over the months since they'd moved in, Donovan Estate had indeed become home in a way she'd never anticipated. Not just a place of employment or temporary sanctuary, but a true home where Ethan flourished and she herself had found a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything you've done for us." "Sarah." Alexander set down his glass and leaned forward slightly. "I think we're well past the point where thanks are necessary between us. What you've brought to this house, to James's life, to mine, can't be measured or repaid." There was an intensity in his gaze that made her heart beat faster. "It's been mutual," she admitted. "Ethan has never been happier, and I've found—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "I've found peace here, security, purpose." "Is that all you've found?" Alexander's question was quiet but laden with meaning. Before Sarah could respond, a commotion from the hallway broke the moment, the sound of running footsteps and Ethan's voice calling for her. "Mom! Mom! Come quick! James is showing me the Christmas decorations in the attic, and we found this huge train set that goes around the tree." Alexander sighed, a smile tugging at his lips despite the interrupted conversation. "We should probably supervise before they decide to set up a railroad through the entire East Wing." The holiday season transformed Donovan Estate. Under Sarah's guidance, with enthusiastic assistance from the boys, the formal grandeur of the mansion softened beneath garlands of fresh pine, twinkling lights, and handmade ornaments that hung alongside priceless heirlooms on the 12-foot tree in the main hall. James's Christmas party was a success, with a dozen of his classmates filling the house with laughter and energy. Sarah observed with quiet joy how the once withdrawn teenager now moved among his friends with newfound confidence, proudly showing them the astronomy equipment in his tree observatory, accepting their compliments with genuine pleasure rather than awkward discomfort. "You've given him back his childhood," Alexander murmured, appearing beside her as she watched James lead his friends in a boisterous game. "After Peter and Catherine died, I thought that part of him was lost forever." "Children are resilient," Sarah replied. "They need the chance to heal, and the security to know it's okay to be happy again." Alexander's gaze shifted to where Ethan was enthusiastically explaining the ornament he'd made to one of James's friends, who was listening with surprising patience. "Ethan has been good for all of us. His capacity for joy is remarkable." "He's always been that way," Sarah said, feeling a surge of pride in her son, even during the hardest times. "Like his mother." Alexander's hand brushed against hers, a fleeting touch that nonetheless sent warmth cascading through her. Resilient, determined, capable of finding joy even in difficult circumstances. On Christmas Eve, after a festive dinner and the traditional reading of A Christmas Carol, which Alexander performed with unexpected dramatic flair, delighting the boys, Sarah tucked Ethan into bed, his eyes already heavy with sleep. "This is the best Christmas ever," he murmured drowsily. "I love it here, Mom." "I'm glad, sweetheart." She brushed his hair back from his forehead, marveling at how much he'd grown in just a few months. "Mr. Donovan loves us, doesn't he?" The innocent question caught Sarah off guard. "He looks at you the way princes look at princesses in my storybooks." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "It's more complicated than storybooks, Ethan." "Why? Don't you love him too?" With the directness of childhood, Ethan cut straight to the heart of the matter. Did she love Alexander Donovan? The question had been hovering at the edges of her consciousness for weeks, unacknowledged but increasingly insistent. The answer, she realized with a mixture of clarity and trepidation, was yes. Somewhere between gratitude and respect, between professional appreciation and personal admiration, love had taken root and flourished. "It's time to sleep," she said, kissing Ethan's forehead and deftly avoiding the question. "Santa won't come if you're still awake." Later, with Ethan and James both asleep and the house quiet save for the occasional crackle of dying embers in the fireplaces, Sarah found herself drawn to the library. The room had become her sanctuary, a place to read, to think, to find moments of stillness amid the busy household. She was surprised to find Alexander already there, standing by the window, watching the snow that had begun to fall outside. He turned at her entrance, and she was struck anew by the transformation in him since their first meeting. The hard edges had softened, the perpetual tension eased. He looked more at peace, more authentically himself. "I thought you might come here tonight," he said, gesturing to the chair beside his. On the small table between them sat the familiar velvet box that contained her wedding ring. "I have something for you, an early Christmas gift if you'll accept it." Sarah approached cautiously, her heart beating a rapid rhythm against her ribs. "Alexander, please, sit." He waited until she had settled into the chair before continuing. "When we met, you were willing to sell this ring, your past, for the sake of your son's future. It was a moment of perfect clarity for me. I knew then what kind of person you were." He opened the box, revealing the simple gold band with its small diamond. "I've kept this for you all these months. Not because I wanted to hold on to a piece of your past, but because I hoped someday you might be ready for a new beginning." Alexander removed the ring from the box and held it out to her. "I'm not offering to return your old ring, Sarah. I'm asking if you would consider accepting it as something new, a promise between us, for a future together. Not as employer and employee, but as partners, as family." Sarah looked from the ring to Alexander's face, reading the vulnerability beneath the confident exterior. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" "I'm asking if you could see yourself loving me," he said quietly, If you could imagine us building a life together, not just for the boys, but for ourselves. I've spent my life focused on duty and achievement, never allowing myself to reach for true happiness, until you showed me what that could look like. It wouldn't be a conventional beginning, Sarah said, aware that she hadn't yet reached for the ring. People would talk. They'd say I planned this all along. Let them talk. Alexander's voice was firm. We know the truth. And the truth is, I've fallen in love with you, Sarah Miller. With your strength, your kindness, your unwavering devotion to your son, I've watched you heal my nephew's heart, bring joy back into this house, and in the process, you've healed something in me too. Sarah felt tears gathering in her eyes. And your work? Your travels? The empire you've built? Still important, but no longer all-consuming. I've begun delegating more, restructuring to reduce my travel, because I've found something more valuable than success. Alexander took her hand gently. I found a chance at the kind of life my brother had, a life rich with love and meaning. Sarah looked down at the ring that had once symbolized her marriage to Daniel, a union that had ultimately brought her Ethan but little else of lasting value. In Alexander's hand, it was transformed. Not just a piece of jewelry, but a symbol of unexpected chances, of life's capacity to surprise and renew. Yes, she said simply, her voice steady despite the tears that now spilled onto her cheeks. Yes, I can imagine loving you, because I already do. Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, not the left hand where her wedding band had once resided, but her right, signifying something new rather than a return to the past. Then he leaned forward and kissed her, a gentle meeting of lips that held the promise of deeper passion, of a lifetime of moments to come. As the snow fell softly outside, blanketing the estate in pristine white, Sarah thought of the twisting path that had led her here, from a desperate mother in a pawn shop to a woman who had found not just security for her child, but love for herself. A journey that had begun with the sacrifice of a ring had come full circle, the same ring now a pledge of a future she could never have imagined. Outside, the world transformed under winter's first substantial snow. Inside, in the warm glow of the library, another transformation was complete, the creation of a family, bound not by blood or obligation, but by choice, by love, by the recognition that sometimes the most precious things in life come to us in the most unexpected ways. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen